all four of them actually have been implemented successfully. And I thought it would be a good idea to maybe show some of the things that we've done and how they've been implemented, as well as what the subject matter was, because in the end, that's what we're really about. I do apologize to Ale, who was one of the speakers, and frankly, I thought one of the most interesting things with avalanche detection and some of the techniques he used for that, to be able to do that. Unfortunately, a war broke out over in Israel. His family is there, and he's chose to stay home and monitor that situation, so he will not be here. So we're going to change things up a little bit, and I'm going to go last and talk about some of the topics we got. Kevin Chang, who is with the University of Idaho, and there's someone in the environmental engineering department. He's going to be talking to us about some of the work that he's been doing on drones and how that's information that was gathered has been implemented in the Moscow area. And some of the, actually one of the nice things about it, it's kind of built into a club, I understand, for the young folks to learn how to use drones in their education activities. So, Kevin?
Okay, and I'm actually going to surprise you, Billy, because I changed the topic on you a little bit, but I'm happy to talk about that project as well. So let me just cue up my slides here. And boy, this is interesting because I can't. Where'd my cursor go? There it is. All right. Okay, well, thank you for coming. This is a session on research. Certainly want to call out the Center for Safety Equity in Transportation. It is a Tier 1 University Transportation Center that is led by Billy and the University of Alaska Fairbanks. We've been a proud partner of that center for the last 5 years. Other project partners include the University of Washington, University of Hawaii at Manoa, and certainly the University of Idaho. And so my talk is going to focus on the heading or the session. Of course, you heard about research, so you kind of came in here not really sure what each of us are going to dive into. I'm going to focus my talk on school transportation. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I wanted to provide you with a little bit of context first. So I've been at the University of Washington, University of Idaho for the last 10 years. Before then, I actually worked right here in Seattle. I worked for King County Department of Transportation, where I managed the school safety program. And at the time, in unincorporated King County, and I still know these numbers to heart, we worked with 16 different school districts and over 70 elementary, middle, and high schools, primarily focused on the infrastructure side of things. So, topic I'm very familiar with. It's an area I'm very familiar with. And then starting with my time at King County and then transitioning to the University of Idaho, I also led a subcommittee with the Transportation Research Board, and it's the only subcommittee or committee focused on school transportation issues. And in fact, it's aptly named the School Transportation Subcommittee. It's a part of the Safety Management Committee. So I was involved and chaired that subcommittee for 9 years, and then of course since then transitioned to the academic side, where I still do a little bit of school transportation research among other topics. I will say that, in addition to the, in addition to the research side of things, school transportation has taken on a new turn because I have 2 little kids. And so my oldest now is attending this local elementary school over in Eastern Washington. And I have the luxury, and I use the word luxury, of being able to actually walk her to school if need be. And of course that is becoming less and less common these days, the ability for children to walk and bike to school. So, why do we care about this topic? Just a little bit of background, some takeaways. There are over 57 million students across the country that attend either a public or private school. And there's a litany of different modes that they can use to get to and from school. Certainly walking and biking we promote. Those are good behaviors. They can get a ride from mom or dad or a guardian, get a carpool. For students that live a certain distance away from school, they're riding a yellow school bus. Certainly here in metropolitan areas, the use of the public transportation or transit system may be possible. And then there's all kinds of other toys that are out there now. Scooters, skateboards, hoverboards, you've probably seen them out there. And one thing that's very unique about school transportation is that congestion typically occurs only twice a day. It definitely occurs right as the afternoon dismissal bell occurs, as kids run out of the school, and it's a very compressed period of time. And then over a more broader period in the morning, when parents kind of gradually get their sons and daughters to school. So it's the morning and afternoon. And certainly there are a lot of transportation elements associated with that trip to school. And so we did a study recently that looked at school transportation and safety. And what's challenging about sort of gathering this data, as you might expect, is that there's not a lot of specific data that focuses on school transportation. Here's a copy of the Idaho Vehicle Collision Report. And of course, because of the fact that it is a purpose, it's a trip purpose of going to and from school, if a crash actually occurs, it's not going to be explicitly denoted on that collision form. That, all right, this was because mom or dad was driving too fast, a collision occurred, right? And so, if you look at this form, there's actually only one place. It's very small, but I highlighted it in red. There's only one item that actually is associated specifically with school transportation and safety, and that's the fact that if a school bus is involved in a crash. That's the only item that we have. And so, there are resources that are available. NHTSA has a document that they publish every year. It's called the School Transportation Related Crashes. And again, it focuses primarily on school bus crashes that occur. And based on those crashes, they have a laundry list of data that is provided. And so for our study, what we wanted to look at was sort of using a slightly different lens. And I want to give credit to Doug Snyder, Kern County Schools down in California, because some of the study design is attributed to him, where he started kind of looked at this holistically and said, is there another way we can carve up the data to see if we can kind of isolate what types of school transportation crashes might occur. And so the basis for our analysis, we decided, and this is what Doug used, is the FAR system, the Fatality Analysis Reporting System. Lots of data. Some of you have maybe played around with it or are familiar with it, but essentially it's a national database that captures any crash that occurs in which there has been a fatality of some sort. And so that's the database that we used for our study. Now, I'm going to go through a couple of very boring looking tables, but just to provide a little bit of context, what we did was we went through the FARS database, we looked at different subsets of data, and we tried to identify specific elements that were school transportation related. So as an example, table 1 here, there is a data file in FARS. It's called the accident data file. And you can see that there is, the first row shows, all right, if it involved a school bus on the form, it will indicate whether there was a school bus involved or no school buses involved. And so obviously if a school bus is involved, we're going to flag that particular fatality. There are other things. Did the crash occur within a designated school zone? All right, that's something that might come into play. And then you can see there's other elements here, whether it was within a school speed limit sign, school advance sign, so on and so forth. Okay, there are other data files that are also associated with school transportation. I'm not going to read through all these, but you can kind of scan through them. So associated with the vehicle or vehicles that occur as part of a fatality. Did it involve a van-based school bus, an actual school bus? Was there a bus that was used as a public school bus? As we kind of scroll down further, I'm going to introduce some concepts that make analysis of the data a little bit more challenging. So we get to some of these attributes here, this DR underscore CF1, CF2, CF3, CF4 with an attribute code 33. What that implies is in the fatality, in the FARS database, if a crash occurred at a location where there was either passing where it was prohibited by some sort of sign posting, whether passing was prohibited because of the pavement markings in the ground, or there was a hill, or there was a curve, or there was a school bus that was displaying some sort of warning not to pass, all of those elements are funneled into this one particular attribute code. And so you can see, all right, well, we want to flag the school transportation crashes, but it may have been a situation where it was simply a driver that was passing when he or she should not have been. All right, we can't discount it, but we also may be gathering some information that isn't particularly pertinent to our study. So those things do come up. And then real quickly, there's a couple other data files: person, pedestrian or bike type, whether there were violations that were coded, and then the last one deals with non-motorized prior data file. This one actually does flag whether or not somebody was going to or from a school. So we went through all those data files to come up with a raw data set. Now, how do we analyze? How do we define school travel? All right, so think about this. We're trying to look at school transportation, and we've got this data set. How do we now come up with a criteria to sort of screen through actual school travel? And it's subjective. I indicate that right in the header. So what we did for our analysis was say, all right, in a typical world, we're not having travel occur on the weekends. So we're going to isolate the Monday through Friday window, the weekdays. All right, now that does, of course, that will include in-service days, right? When the school isn't necessarily open, but we're just going to broadly capture that. All right, morning arrival, afternoon dismissal. What is the appropriate time frame? Well, again, this is a national database. Different schools start and end at different times. Yellow school buses are going to be on the road at different times. What's an appropriate window to use? And so again, here, a very broad window was assumed: 3-hour block in the morning starting at 6 o'clock, and a 3-hour block in the afternoon starting at 2 o'clock. Okay? Dates throughout the year. Again, each school district is going to start and end at different dates. For our study, we used a start date of September 1st and an end date of July 15th. And then, last but not least, we also took a look at rural versus urban data. All right? Not a perfect system by any stretch of the imagination, but it does give us a starting point. Just real briefly, this is how we segregated out our rural versus urban sites. There's, again, an attribute in FARS that allows us to identify whether it's a rural or urban facility. I should mention that the very far right column, which I didn't talk about earlier, even within the FARS database, some of these attributes have changed over time. So even though we're looking at a 20-year time horizon, we actually have to pick and choose. In fact, if you were sitting in on Fred's talk earlier, he was talking about how temporal data right over 20 years may not be appropriate, but we'll pretend we didn't hear his talk for this one here, right? All right, so here are the results. I'm going to share with you 4 quick graphics here. So what we did was we took all the data and said, all right, what do the results imply? And so these are the actual number of fatalities potentially, and I want to highlight the word potentially, attributed to school transportation that occurred over this 20-year horizon. And we have 2 lines. The solid blue line is along rural locations. The dashed yellow line occurred along urban facilities. And so you can see this is the total number of fatalities that occurred over the 20-year horizon. And you can kind of eyeball that along the rural facilities, it's kind of trending, sort of flatlining, trending downward. The urban line is in a pretty narrow band, but there does seem to be a slight uptick in the last 5 years or so. Here are the number of people that were in a vehicle associated with a school transportation crash. So that's what's defined by the number of persons along the y-axis. Again, we've got the rural and urban bands. Again, a decline for rural facilities, urban somewhat flatline. This is the number of pedestrians. So these are the people that are not in the vehicles, but are attributed to a crash that could be tied to school transportation. You can see it's not a significant number. All right, we're not trying to make anything out than is actually the case. This is nationwide. Number of pedestrians does not exceed 50. over any calendar year, but we do see a slight uptick along urban facilities. Rural is pretty flat. And then lastly, the number of actual school buses that were recorded to have been involved in a fatal crash across the country in the last 20 years. So we've got these different trend lines. If you want to kind of look at the actual mathematics, we did an analysis where we developed a regression line for each of these crashes. And what you can see is that maybe the key point I want to make here is that most of the annual percentage changes, that far right column, are negative, which means that they're trending downward, they're trending in the right direction. But we do have a couple of situations, particularly in our urban communities, where we see a slight uptick in the number of total fatalities, and we're seeing a slight increase in the number of pedestrians that have been associated with a fatal crash that could be associated with school transportation. So those are sort of the main conclusions from the study that we did. Now, that being said, school transportation remains a very safe travel activity. And unfortunately, when a collision does occur, when you hear about a school bus that rolls over, there's so few, but when they do occur, you hear about it, right? It's immediately in the news. So what I put as a little asterisk next to the safe word to say, though there are opportunities that remain to make it even safer, all right? Of course, good data, is going to generate, the information that I present to you is only as good as the data that we have. And there are opportunities that are available to still even fine-tune the information that we have. I would love to be able to track, and you'd almost have to do it at a very, very granular level where you're asking people, perhaps some sort of a travel household survey, how many times over the course of a year when you've been dropping off your son or daughter have you been involved in a crash? That's really the only way that you'd be able to capture this. And then of course, we use the FARS data set. Injuries, near misses are, we don't know what's out there. And I'm going to share my next slide, sort of talk a little bit about that. So I always like to leave folks with some concepts, some ideas. So I'm calling these ongoing concerns, but of course concerns lead to potential opportunities. Things to think about in this space include school siting issues. So this is a challenge. And what we mean by school siting is, you can imagine, especially in like the Seattle metropolitan area, new developments are going up, Issaquah, further south, Renton, Kent, wherever you see these big developments that are going in. And a lot of times those developments, single family homes, your classic 3-bedroom, 2-bath, perfect for small families. And so over time, as those developments fill, there's going to be need for elementary and middle schools, right? The local community schools are not going to be able to facilitate all those kids that are there. Well, where is the school district going to build that new school? Well, they're going to need to find a parcel of land that's big enough, but is also cost-effective enough to build it. And invariably, they always choose a location that's on the outskirts of town, far away from all the development, where the land is cheaper. And it's almost always going to be located on a high-volume, high-speed arterial roadway. So what we mean by school siting is, that's not an environment that's conducive to walking and biking. That's an environment that's really conducive to transporting children, personal car or school bus. Those are really the only two limitations. And so that's a challenge. And when you create an environment like that, where does the walking and biking modes go? Will parents allow their 6-year-old to walk along a street that's 35 miles per hour? It's frustrating because I shared with you that initial picture of my neighborhood school. I am very comfortable allowing my 6-year-old to walk to school. There are no arterials. It's a 5-minute walk. It's all residential streets. My wife, however, will not allow our children to walk to school. Even though the one major crossing in quotes, there's a crossing guard that's there in the morning and afternoon. So what do you do? Another concern that's really interesting is seatbelts on school buses. Most of you have ridden on yellow school buses. You know that for years and years, the way we protect children and adults that ride yellow school buses is what's defined as compartmentalization. Big foamy seats, right? So if you get bounced around, you're not going to get hurt. And again, the number of fatalities that occur with school buses is very, very low. But when there is a rollover crash, that's when the news, that's when things hit the fan. And there are concerns about improving safety on school buses. And so there are 6 states that now mandate seatbelts on school buses, and you can see the list there. Seatbelts are not the solution for everything. In fact, we have an ongoing study right now where we're interviewing school district administrators throughout the state of Idaho to discuss and analyze the pros and cons of seatbelts on school buses. Yes, if every child is wearing a seatbelt, Billy coaches high school kids, so he's probably familiar with these kinds of trips. If every child in a yellow school bus is wearing a seatbelt, there's an added level of protection. Probably helps with behavioral issues because everyone's in their seat, not moving around. But who's going to enforce that, right? 30, 40 high schoolers get on a high school. Is the driver going to come back and make sure that every child is buckled properly? You're going to have children of different sizes. Are you going to have to adjust the lap shoulder belt so that they're protected? So those are all issues, and that's why you're not seeing a big national movement to get seat belts installed. There's also, of course, the cost associated with retrofitting hundreds of thousands of buses that currently do not have seat belts. You will see, of course, the seat belts right in front if you've got someone that's in a wheelchair. They need to be strapped down. Another issue, and I've had the fortune of partnering with one of the National Yellow School Bus Associations, is looking at the number of illegal school bus passes that occur. So that's when school bus is stopped, lights are flashing, the stop arm has been deployed. Are drivers still passing them on the left? And occasionally, we've heard stories of a driver passing the bus on the right. So every year, the National Association of State Directors of Pupil Transportation Services, NASDIPS, does a survey where they'll ask their drivers to just spend a day tallying the number of people that are illegally passing their bus. And they actually get a pretty good database. So this past year, they had over 24% of their drivers participate in this poll. And cumulatively, they counted over 59,000 illegal passes. So there's a driver that stopped, lights are flashing, stop arm is deployed, so stop, any car behind them should be stopping, and they're still seeing people buzz by them. So that's an issue. And there's companies, there's a lot of companies that are looking at how do you make the school bus even more visible than it is. It's already pretty, if you followed a school bus, you see all kinds of gizmos, but there are companies out there that feel that there needs to be even more visibility. And then I'll mention, I'm a big believer in the walking and biking modes when possible, when it's safe, simply because it does form positive habit-forming behavior. As a society, we talk a lot about health and public safety, and it's hard to get adults to go from car to walking and biking. And in many cases, the adults who are making that difficult transition now were people that walked and biked as children, right? But we're moving away from that. So now the latest studies generally say that the number of people that walk and bike, the kids that walk and bike are about 12, 13%. So if you've got 87% of the population that isn't already forming these good behaviors, how are we to expect them to walk and bike 20, 30 years from now? So with that, and then, yes, we did do a study recently that focused on using drones to collect travel mode behavior. I'm going to sort of just pause and not get into that because I know we've got some other speakers, but if we have time, I'm happy to share those details as well. So with that, Billy, there's a picture of Moscow. All right. Thank you so much. Yeah, please.
So, remind me, was the data from Idaho or nationwide? It was federal.
Federal.
Yeah. So, have you done any looking at like spots that are performing especially well or performing especially poorly? It seems like things get pretty.
That's a great question. So it's come up before. So I shared this presentation with the school district, the national group, and that was a question that has come up that I have not answered them yet. And so, exactly, it's like, should at a state level. Do we have some states that are performing poorer than others? And obviously, we could probably draw some conclusions. Yeah, so so to answer your question, yes, there's opportunities to look at this data at a more granular level. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, please.
How is that FARS data collected? And is it consistent nationwide?
So the database is out there for anyone to use, and it is a nationwide database of all the fatalities. So each state feeds into that FARS database.
But how do they collect that
Each,
data?
yeah, each state is required to go through their crash data and fatality data, and then aggregate that and report it into the FARS. So there's usually one or two people in each state that's responsible for that.
Okay, so presumably it's not the same form that's used.
It is not the same form. It is not the same form. It varies from state to state. Yeah. Yeah. Brian, were you going to add something?
I just was going to add that in terms of the state, the Washington Traffic Safety Commission oversees the FARS data collection. And as we know, it's probably sadly the most accurate of most of the data because it's a fatality, because it has a reporting structure through these government highway safety reps or the DOT. In this case, it's our government highway safety rep. They have to ship that to NHTSA.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, Billy, thank you. Yeah.
Our next speaker is Salona Granados.
Yeah, Granados.
She's been doing a fair amount of work with the tribes here in the Northwest, and I asked her to come talk about some of that work and how it's being implemented. So,
Sweet, yeah. I'm gonna continue sitting down because I have like a weird hip pain right now. And I like looking at it. But let's see.
is that working?
There we go. Okay, yes. So, this title, I just want to take some time to just talk about drones and the engagement and participatory planning processes. I'm Danette Navajo, and I'm a research scientist at the Climate Impacts Group here at the University of Washington. And I guess an overview of the presentation, I'll be starting off with zooming into two rural, isolated, and tribal indigenous communities in Washington. The next slide, we'll kind of talk about that a bit more, and then after that I'll be going through the common challenges among these rural, isolated, tribal indigenous communities, and then provide some examples of community-led responses to those challenges and risks that we discuss. And from there I'll discuss my collaboration with the Shawana Bay Indian Tribe, which will lead into highlighting all the relevant work with Westport and the neighboring high school. And that's where drones come in. And I'll wrap up with some final thoughts. So yes, the guiding question is, can drones have a role in the engagement and participatory planning processes for rural, isolated, and tribal indigenous communities? And the genesis for this question is two Reedy communities here in Western Washington along the coast. One of them is in Westport, and you can see the Acosta Junior High School a little bit close by, and the other is Shawana Bay Indian Tribe, just a little bit farther out from Westport. So the reservation is small. It's only 355 acres of land, which is derived from executive order, and there's about 400 enrolled members, but less than 100 actually live on the reservation, and it's right next to Tokeland. The population of Westport is about 254 people, and it's along Great Harbor Peninsula. This in the next slide, slides map goes to show how far these two communities are from hospitals and schools and other essential places like grocery stores. And you can see the closest hospitals are in Aberdeen and in Raymond, and Aberdeen for the tribe. In addition, the closest high schools, well actually K-12 schools for the Shore Bay Indian tribe is in Raymond, which is about 23 miles away or 30 minutes away, and in Westport, which is about 12 miles away. For Westport, about 12 miles away or 20 minutes away. And the closest urban center is Olympia, the capital of Washington. And this is a zoomed out view, I guess, to better see the region. Seeing the distance Reedy communities have to go for essential services and needs points out to the statement that Reedy communities have common hazard, risks, and challenges. And within that, improving traffic and transportation safety, emergency planning, and response capacity are imperative goals. Although there are many similarities among Reedy communities, it is important to note that each community is different, so context-sensitive and culturally responsive approaches are critical. And the next slides will go over some of the common challenges Reedy communities face. So one common risk is landslides. A landslide occurring for the Shoalwater Banyan tribe, for instance, would make isolation even worse, and that has already happened in the past. And so traveling to safety or getting essentials becomes extremely difficult. And you can see here, this is a map that shows the projected impacts of the potential Cascadia earthquake and ensuing tsunami on the reservation and Tokelau communities. The red is the areas underwater, and the areas above water is the orange. And a high magnitude earthquake would take lives and destroy structures, and this goes for Westport as well. The Shoalwater Bay's case for erosion is quite extreme, that in the average year the ocean moves 100 feet or so inland. And the image on the left shows over time how that has encroached on their land, and it has destroyed a lighthouse, schools, a cannery, and the state highway, and which has now moved in. And so now the current highway 105 is also a risk. So the current only access and exit route is Route 105, which will be underwater in certain parts, with subsistence and also sea level rise. And then again, high traffic fatality rates, poor road conditions, and reservations are some of the most isolated, all-dependent populations in the U.S. But of course, there's a lot of context there, systemic issues. So that is certainly not a choice. The community-led responses for rapid disasters. For the Shoalwater Banyan tribe, it's a vertical tower, and this was influenced by Japanese design. And it provides, safety for over 400 people. And another rapid-led response. This is the tower, very cool, just opened up recently. It's the first in the nation. And another another disaster response is the Coaster School's tsunami-proof gym, and this is able to withstand tsunami. It has a 4-day supply of food. So what about the responses to different pace change and also rapid disasters? In the Shoalwater Banyan tribe's case, the response to various overlapping threats is acquiring over 4,000 acres of land in the uphills adjacent to the reservation to move people, buildings, and infrastructure there over time. The tribe calls this initiative the Upland Expansion, aka Community-Led Managed Retreat or Relocation. And the picture shows some of the raised log areas that used to be from logging industry. And this is a community layout of a concept that I was a part of a studio last year, now graduated. So this picture on the right is a concept, again, of the layout. And this is, you can see different programming, and even has a helipad. And this is good to underscore that there's already been a real immense loss for the Shawada Bay Indian tribe, and there will be continued loss. But there's real opportunity here. And as you can see, there's opportunity to reimagine what the community wants to be, and that needs to be paramount to the upland expansion planning and development. So, this is where leading to my time and energy focusing on the transportation mobility element of the planning of the upland expansion planning with Stillwater Bay Indian Tribe staff and community. The intention behind this thesis was to not reinforce the status quo, but to reorient away from traveling by private vehicle. So 3 engagement events. 1, transportation needs an opportunity survey, and attending another event as a follow-up was necessary to ensure that this was not what I wanted, and to make space for community to envision the future transportation system. And on the right shows a short version of the thesis, which was the report. And then you can see some of the engagement responses where people threw up the map where they go for certain needs. Trails was a cool idea that popped up a lot from folks. And then yeah, one of the cool things I liked from one of the responses from an event in December was someone wrote down, hiking and recreational trails would be awesome for my grandkids, and it'd be a great experience. So this was also some of the survey results. A question from the survey, the Transportation Needs Opportunity Survey, and one of the interesting things was EV charging stations and internet access came to one of the top 3 answers, and of course safety was on people's minds. And then this was that follow-up event I was talking to about, Yellow Brick Road event. Just reporting back the findings from the thesis and the engagement up to that point. And then just to kind of hear more about people's thoughts around the tribes really, they got funding quite recently to build out roads for that upland expansion development. So I guess a new question arises, through my report based on the thesis, the engagement outreach up until this point, and recent conversations with the tribe and the staff and leadership. We've heard the need for tools that support technical planning for the upland expansion, such as archaeology, where to place development, water piping, and so forth, and also the desire to visually detailed ways to support the reimagining of what could be the new community. So again, this question of how do we move the report and the tribe's priority for upland expansion planning into action while also centering the community. So what facilitates both is creating amazing maps and 3D models. This is a look at, let's see. This is like a 3D model of some of the data taken from drones to create this 3D model of Westport. And I thought this was great for the tribe as well. And this was funded by the Center of Safety, Equity, and Transportation. And this team, went out to, reached out to the Rapid facility here at UW, and they collaborated to generate this model. And it was used for further research, grad students' design work as seen here, and also used for engaging, the Westport local government departments and school districts that paved the way, of. Oops.
Quick question while you're loading it back up.
Yeah.
So those bridges that we were looking at just now, and literally the paths we were just looking at, are those things that exist now, or you're saying you guys drafted them up, showed them to them, and then they built it based off of like what you created?
Yeah, it was basically just, it was obviously, it's not built yet. This is
Cool.
basically for engagement purposes.
Well,
And to build up, buy-in from, like I said, local government and departments to really lead the way for more engagement to get to that point. I think, like in this next slide. This next slide, kind of like to, with all that buy-in, this Center for Transportation Equity team piloted this drone, after-school drone pilot program with, the Coastal High School. And the team collaborated with the school again, and the curriculum ensured that students understood not only how to operate the drone, but understanding the regulations around it and how to get licenses and drone safety. But also raise awareness and specifically prepare in the case of an earthquake and tsunami. And for this, students also created a video using aerial footage from the drones they were using. So my takeaway here is that it's great seeing work that engages youth and builds the knowledge and skill sets to address the community's needs. So, like, along with that program, there was a lot of people on that team, and even grad students. So, during that, they met with students to see how they could, like the 3D models, reimagine their community and what that would be. What would a resilient park design look like? And a lot of students created different ideas. And it was something that kind of adds this idea of how can we be creative about brainstorming with the community. And I guess I kind of want to wrap this up more quickly, but yeah, I think a lot of these ideas with the CSET team kind of culminated to some ideas for the tribe. And that looks like, creating GIS story maps and incorporate videos from own community members describing some of their, past and present and future visions for the upland expansion planning and development. But also at the same time, how drones can make community engagement inspiring, and what about using augmented reality into that mix, or even incorporating those 3D models we saw earlier, but physical 3D models for community members to really see themselves and their future community. So yeah, I think my question is, like, how could you see drones in what you're doing now for communities or with communities? And this is kind of a glimpse of what's already gone on in a couple communities out in Washington. So yeah. Thank you.
Any questions for Sharon while I set up the next?
I have one more question too. So it was actually a question for both of you guys. Like, okay, it sounds like, and something I'm curious about as well, is like, you were saying like encouraging, you said how in the world are you gonna get parents to move from their cars to just walking to school? And for even maybe, like in the tribes, getting people to not use their individual car and coming up with some like effective system or whatever. So I guess like, yeah, from like a marketing standpoint or a psychology standpoint, do you guys have any ideas of how we do kind of start that trend? How do you make it cool or desirable or anything?
So part of it is environment based, and I think an example is literally like right here at the University of Washington campus. So I drove a car here today, and it was a pain to get to this building, right? And it would have been so much nicer, perhaps, light rail, so context-wise, you make it so that it becomes less appealing to use certain modes. The aerial that I showed you of the neighbor of my local elementary school has 2 wonderful drive-throughs for cars and for buses. And so in the afternoon, it is literally like a Starbucks where parents line up, their child sees the car, walks in, and they drive off. And you make it so convenient that parents are not going to want to, the parent doesn't even need to get out of the car. Literally, they just drive up, rain or shine.
Yeah.
And so if you can create an environment where it's not so convenient, then people may be, now, when you do that, of course, then you have the community in uproar, that now you're creating an unsafe environment, right? So how do you find that balance of not making it so easy, you know, for pickup and drop off, but at the same time encouraging? And it's not easy, but yeah, it's a fun one. Yeah, so that's my answer.
We're going to completely shift gears here. And I'm going to take you on a visit to the Arctic. In particular, Point Lay, which is in the upper northwest quadrant of the state of Alaska, well above the Arctic Circle. In fact, they're just about to have their last day of sunshine for a while. And this is all based on a manual that we produced not too long ago with CSET money and PacTrans money and some money from Alaska Department of Transportation to develop a permafrost guide for their engineers. And one of the problems that we have is we're getting a lot of folks coming in without the proper training, or even, they can't even speak the language that we're dealing with here. So we developed that in order to help them along. And one of the things, some of the things we're dealing with here is the evolution of our landscape as climate change comes about. And the other part is how do we adapt to those changes as we move along. This particular house, believe it or not, the original ground was here. And this is all consolidation underneath that house. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. We just finished a manual or a denial of commission, a report looking at the threats to our communities in Alaska. And Point Lay is tied with Barrow, now Utqiagvik, as the #2 threat of permafrost destroying their community. And you'll see what that's like here as we move along. Here's the team. Ben is a cartographer, which turned out to be a very important part. Misha Konevsky is a permafrost scientist. He can figure permafrost and tell you how it's made. Yuri Shure is a permafrost engineer, and I'm kind of jack of all trades in this whole thing. So one of the things we want to look at is looking at Point Lay as a case to look at what's happening in the Arctic to our infrastructure. Not necessarily transportation, but transportation is a big part of that. So we wanted to look at that. But one of the things we want to do is try to understand how much of the damage that we're seeing to the infrastructure in the village is due to the infrastructure itself and the impact of infrastructure on the permafrost, and how much of it is due to climate change. And I think I'm going to hopefully shock you as to the answer to that question. But that's one of the things we really want to focus on. And I'm going to go fairly fast in this because we're getting short on time. Permafrost, the term permafrost, only means the ground is frozen for 2 or more years. Nothing more, nothing less. So if I have a pile of rocks and it's frozen 2 or more years, it is permafrost. If I have fine-grained silt and it's frozen 2 or more years, it's permafrost. If I have a block of water and it's frozen 2 or more years, it's permafrost. So what we've done is started trying to get that terminology. I'm not going to go through all of these, but one of the purposes of that manual is to define all these terms. And it's a whole language in itself. Syngenetic permafrost. Well, what that means is it was laid down in layers as it froze. Now, if you can imagine going through all those freeze-thaw cycles, you know about freeze-thaw cycles, sucks the water up, creates ice lenses in there, and all of a sudden you got ice-rich permafrost, which when it thaws is not very good material. It turns to almost water, mud, as a result of that. But epigenetic permafrost, Mother Nature comes along, they flips the switch, it turns the refrigerator on, and it freezes it. Not so bad, okay? So knowing how it is formed starts giving us an idea of how it's going to perform. And then there's Yedema, the worst of all permafrost, which is more ice than soil. It's anything above about 30% volume by volume is considered syngeneic. So we start talking about all these terms. I'm going to use the term thermokarst, and just basically an area that is thawed and settled in there. So we've got this whole language of high centered polygons, low centered polygons, that we have to teach our engineers. This is a great picture of several ice wedges there. You can imagine what happens if that thaws.
Is the 30% one the worst because it has the most like room to thaw and create disaster?
Think about it. You got 30% ice by volume,
Right.
and it thaws.
Right, that's a lot of trouble.
That means 30% of it's going to get about 30% thaw consolidation.
Right.
So for every 30 feet, you're going to get 10 feet of thaw consolidation. So that's pretty major. And these are ice wedges, and that's 100% ice, so you get 100% thaw consolidation in that. And then we talk about a number of other things. I'm going to skip over some of these. There's just some nice pictures for you to look at. In Point Lake, it's a beautiful case of everything failing. The utilities have failed. 12 years ago, they put in underground utilities, water and sewer, to 70 homes. Less than 20 of them are now served. The rest are back to honey buckets. Everybody know what a honey bucket is? Yeah, I'm sure you can imagine. So many of those have done. They lost their water supply. They had a lake, they had a water supply. The river came too close to the water supply, cut through one of the ice wedges, and the whole lake drained overnight. Lost the whole thing. We knew it was coming. We just didn't know what day it was going to happen, but we knew 2 years in advance that it was coming. They got 3 water tanks, over 1 million gallons apiece. One of them, due to the permafrost thawing under it, settled, broke the tank, and flooded the village in the middle of the winter.
How much settlement was it?
How much was it?
Settlement was the tank, like millimeters?
That one was probably about 3 feet.
Okay, wow, yeah.
Yeah, and so, again, we knew it was coming, but nobody had the money to fix it. Okay, homes are being abandoned because of thawing permafrost. I'll show you a photo. Power poles are leaning around. Ice cellars. Ice cellars in the culture, in the Inuit culture, is very important because that's where they store their food. But it's more than that because they can't reproduce the taste that an ice cellar gives because of the mold that grows in the ice cellar. They can't reproduce the taste which they dearly love by putting it in a freezer. So they're losing part of their culture as a result of that. So all of these things are occurring very rapidly.
By the way, I thought she said how much was the settlement? Is any of this covered by insurance or anything? Is there
No.
any? Okay.
Oh, yeah, I think like ground settlement.
Right, but
Yeah, yeah.
like what? You guys are just stuck with this and like deal with it and move out of your house and you're done.
Yeah, but basically, yes. So
Wow.
we use some tools. This is a great tool. I don't know if anybody's ever seen one. It's called a Seeper cord. Look what he's driving that thing with. It's just a handheld drill. Battery operated drill. He's drilling. He's drilling it. So if you're in silts and sediment sands, great tool to drive a core. Ice augers through the ice wedges. Yes.
Sorry, I have so many questions. Do you pull out, like, you managed to recover the silts? Like, could you recover soft clays?
There's an ice wedge that we drill. That's how deep that ice wedge went. But yes, there's an example of the core.
What's it called again?
A Seeper core.
Super core?
Great tool. But you can see the amount of ice in here, and here's some wedge ice in there. Pretty fascinating. And we found that those ice wedges are about 10 meters deep. The Yedema there is about 10 meters. And so we also look at the temperature. The temperature of the permafrost there is about -5 C at the moment. gradually warming, but we're seeing that. And then Ben and his drones, we're using drones for everything now. Basically, he flew the drone and he created an orthographic map of the entire community, and with about 5 centimeter elevation resolution. So we were able to put that together. And I'm going to show you in a moment some of the things that we were able to do with that. So from that, what we really found was all of this green is what we call Yadama. That Yadama had about potential for 40% thaw consolidation. All of this red here are thermokarst troughs, and these are ice wedges that have thawed in there. I'll show you some pictures of that. This is what we call a drain lake basin, kind of like the one I said they lost the water supply in. It doesn't have nearly as much ice in it, and it would be a great place to build, except it floods every year. So this is what those folks are dealing with. And you can see all of that red is just ice wedges that have thaws. And it looks like this. Right where Ben is pointing up there is where the soil or the ice wedge originally was, and all of that is thawed. 10 foot of embedment in those piling. They have now less than 3. People, when a big blow comes through in the middle of winter, they go to the school to spend the night because they're afraid the house is going to fall over. Another example of that, the whole house is in an ice wedge. So you can imagine what's going on there. Here's what's happening. These front end, this is partially in, you get some of the piling in ice wedge, some not, you get thaw. And in case the last house, the whole thing is in the ice wedge and hardly holding up. How are we doing? Okay, we're going to speed up. Here's a house that has been repaired multiple times and sliced the piling in to save the house. And when I was out there this last summer, they had done it yet again. Okay, this is where I want to give you the crux of things. These photos were taken in Point Lay at 3 different locations over time since 1949. The top one is in ground that is totally undisturbed out there. So you can see that in 1949, there has been some change. And we can attribute that to climate change, okay? It's just a natural process. But if you look down here, this is the northernmost part of the village. These houses, this road is less than 10 years old. You can see the difference between the top photo and that from the thermokarst that's going on ice wedge.
Right.
And look at the bottom. That one. This area is about 25 years.
So basically, you're saying like they're building it even though you can see it's crumbling beneath them. Okay.
Geology doesn't
But
actually.
that's their culture. That's where they want to live because that's where the beluga whale come. There's a reason for it being there. Come on, go. Not really touch with this mouth, this thing.
Oh, there you go. Oh.
No.
Did it go too far? I gotta get back.
Oh.
Oh.
Too much tonight.
Out of the order. Okay. I'm going to skip a bunch of this.
I'm sorry, because you said at the beginning this is informal, I need to go, otherwise I'll miss my ride home. But has anyone considered like the changing, given Alaska and the subduction zone earthquake and strong seismic hazard, is there any concern about changing earthquake hazard as permafrost melts?
There are people that have talked about that, but in this area, this is not a seismic zone, so we're pretty good shape. This is a really important, the next 2 slides are really important. If you look up here, block 400 is the old part of town, block 900, you almost get a linear trend with time as far as the thermokarst. Here's an actual site.
What's another?
Okay, this site has not had any construction on it at all. Okay, you can see that the damage or the thermokarsting is much greater in the areas that have been disturbed by man or in the construction.
Wow.
Here's the rate of change. And the thing that surprised me most is this. The rate of change has remained constant since 1949 in those undisturbed areas, which is a bit surprising in light of what we think we know and what scientists have been telling us. Yet in the village, the rate of change has exploded. Okay? So what that tells me is we need to pay attention to how we build our infrastructure and how we build our communities, because we're creating, in effect, heat islands.
Right.
And it turns out that blowing snow, snow berms, snow drifting, has a huge impact. The reflection off the buildings has a huge impact. The roads that we're building disturb the natural flow of water and drainage, so we pond the water in all of this. So we really need to be really careful about saying that climate is the cause of our problems. We need to pay attention to what is truly being caused by our climate and what's being caused by our designs or inability to design for our Arctic. So really, some of the recommendations that we give on Point Lake, one is that they have thought about moving, but our recommendations are hoping to try and keep the community in place in there. There are some engineering solutions that we can do that, but one of them is just fill all the low spots in with fine grained material and try to reestablish the thermal gradient and reestablish drainage. The other one is to build everything on construction pads, which insulates the ground. Because what we found is the areas that have the thick pad are performing much better. Okay. We also recommend that 10 feet is not enough, that we go to at least 25 to 30 feet. We know that there's good ground about 40 feet down. So that would be the ideal, but very expensive. Found the piling in the solid material rather than the ice. And then, of course, implement a maintenance program to keep the snow drifts out and all of those kinds of things. So from this, we know that the permafrost ability is driven primarily by the infrastructure, increased snow drifting, snow storage in there, increased ponding, increased heat input to the system, both direct and indirect, and altering of the vegetation. This is kind of a new thing, and I think we probably need to be applying it globally, but we need to start, we as engineers like to look at one building at a time, okay? And so we've done that here, one building at a time, but we have to start thinking, we have to start designing the whole community and looking at all of the cumulative impacts of our buildings within the and then, we're showing here that the infrastructure is a major driver, but we do recognize that climate change is having an effect. So I'm taking a 30-minute, I'm doing less than 15 minutes. So, any questions? Yes.
How shocked were you to see that the natural areas didn't change any?
We expected to see much more change, the rate of change being accelerated. That's what everybody says, the hockey puck curve. We're not seeing that. And there's a couple of things that could be having an effect of that. Remember, that's called permafrost. And we just haven't gotten to the point where there's enough thaw to really show itself. So in the next 20 to 30, 40 years, that change may start to accelerate. May.
It hasn't maybe hit a critical point.
It hasn't hit that critical point yet.
In the natural areas.
I know I missed much of the presentation, but I know you also have written something about nature-inspired solutions. Because you mentioned engineering solutions. Do you think there would be some sort of nature-inspired solutions for this issue?
We always try to do some of those things. And I don't know what that would be at this point in time, but one of the things we are looking at, we know the drainage. Where we have good drainage, we don't have near as much Okay, so the idea of reestablishing the drainage, and we also are learning to mine the tundra. We can do that now, that's relatively new, so we can go out in places like around the rivers and mine the tundra and actually place it within the village to help reestablish that vegetation, which through transpiration actually helps cool the permafrost. So we are looking for those kinds of solutions, but they're very limited. Any other questions, comments?
Billy, quick question. So you talked about, like, community planning, but how do you've got different owners that may not all be on the same page. So how do you bring people together for the common good?
Well, first, I think what we have to do is to develop the best practices. And when we develop say a new block in this case, or a new subdivision, there is no reason we can't design that subdivision with those those things in place before we sell the land, and then the requirements of all that goes together with it. In this case, we've suggested that perhaps before they start building there, that they just level it with a thick pad of, about 5 foot thick pad of gravel to provide some insulation. So it's a matter of timing more than convincing people, in my mind. If you design it and that's the way it's going to be, then people are not going to complain. Otherwise, they'll go somewhere else, right? Anything else? Okay. I think we're at a break time here. So I appreciate your spending an extra couple 5 minutes or so with us. The breaks are back over there. Thank you for being here. And once again, for the speakers.
Yeah. The social hour.
That's right.
Your phone is really good. I have a quick question for you. Have they gotten any evacuation orders to use that junior high yet, or the shoulder structure?
Oh, thankfully, no.
None have been. Nobody's ended up in those because of some big quake in the Pacific somewhere.
No.
Okay.
I
Just-
don't know if it's a recent.
Thank you.
I take it's all locked up, and there's probably a community process to get it unlocked if they need to.
I think so, yeah.
I've been gone. I was in the for a while.
Actually, anyone's going to break the